back to your childhood for a minute. So for some of us that's a little closer than others, but think back to your childhood. For some of us a little farther away than others. How do we say this nicely? So think about your childhood. You can pick an age, but think about your friends that you had when you were a child of some age. Think about different groups of friends, different friends that you had, and think about a best friend that you had. Some of us had one, maybe some of us had several, but think about a best friend that you had. And now turn next to you to somebody and just tell them the name of your best friend growing up. So for that person, let's pick that person that you mentioned. For how many of you were you friends or are you friends with that person for more than 10 years? Okay, more than 20 years. I know you haven't been alive 10 years. More than 20 years? More than 30 years? 40 years? 50 years? Wow. I mean, that's awesome. Some of you have been friends, like best friends all your life. So now turn back to that person that you just mentioned something to and tell them, why was that person your best friend? You know, what did you like about him? What did you have in common? What was it that made you best friends? And you don't have to give a long list, but just one thing. What was it that made you best friends? It seems like it's one thing to be friends with somebody. You know, we have lots of friends, but there's something unique and something different about a best friend. You know, it's like another level of commitment, or it's another stage in a relationship. It takes something. We tell best friends things that we wouldn't tell other people. Or we spend a lot of time with a best friend and we don't necessarily spend that much time with other people. There's more trust between a best friend. It's a big step to be a best friend. And the biggest step in a relationship with Jesus is to become a disciple. The Bible talks a lot about disciples, and the history of the church has talked a lot about disciples. God showed us pictures of disciples. Disciples are all over the Bible, and this picture that we get is that becoming a disciple is the biggest step that we can take in a relationship with God. And if we take that step, not just once, but all the time, it can make the biggest change in our relationship with God. Wow. Now, everybody, I think, knows generally what a disciple is. So, what words would you use to describe a disciple? What's just adjectives, descriptions? What's a disciple? Follower? Okay, follower, that's good. Any others? What's that? An advocate. Oh, okay. Student, follower, advocate. Surrender. Any others? You good? We kind of capture it? Yeah, I mean, we have this idea that a disciple, it's a student, it's somebody who follows along, it's somebody who's being mentored, it's somebody who's learning something from somebody else. An apprentice, maybe we would call it in our day. We're being apprenticed into something, so we're learning how to do this sort of thing. Jesus had in mind some very interesting things about being a disciple, some of which were what we tend to think of, and some of which were not. There were lots of disciples going on in the days of the Bible. Philosophers had disciples. They had their little crew or their group of people who would follow after them and kind of learn their way of thinking about the world. Political leaders had disciples. They had people who they would train up to become people like them and to be able to take over for them. So, I mean, discipleship was a very common thing. That's what people did. But people in the Old Testament, they also, and in the Jewish world, they also did discipleship. And the Jewish people actually were very serious about discipleship. And here's why. In that day, and really the days of Jesus and just before, there was no public school. There was no system of public education like we have today. The only education that people tended to get was either in their home or their family, or in their religious affiliation. So in the synagogue, they had a very rigorous education system, but it capped out at at the age of 13. So once you went through all the educational system and you got to be 13, you were done. And in that system, they would learn all kinds of things. I mean, they would learn basically how to follow God faithfully. And in order to follow God faithfully, you had to learn how to obey, because their whole system was based on obeying God according to all the laws and rules of the Old Testament. And in order to obey God, you had to be able to read those laws and rules. And in order to read those laws and rules, you had to learn Hebrew. So they would learn Hebrew, they would be able to read the laws, and they would be able to obey and understand what all these laws meant and how to live and follow them. That was all education up to the age of 13. But when you got to 13, then you were determined to be somebody who was fit to be able to live faithfully to God and to follow God. You were done. That was all that they determined that you needed. Well, of course, there were some people who said, well, wait a minute. I think there's more to this. I need more. It's not just about learning these things and not just about obeying these laws. I need to learn what to do when a law doesn't tell me what to do. What if I face a situation with somebody and I don't have a law to apply to it? How do I figure that out? How do I live? Well, that's when people would ask to become a disciple. They would ask a teacher or a rabbi, may I be your disciple and follow after you? And if they did that, then they entered this relationship as a disciple. Now, it's kind of like applying to school. You get in and you become, when you get admitted to a school, what do you become? You become a student. When you get hired at a company, you become an employee. You actually became an official thing as a disciple. You became a disciple. That was an official role that somebody came into. Before this, they were not a disciple. But if they came into this relationship as a disciple, they were a disciple. I mean, it was a whole new role and a whole new way of life where they started to learn how to live, how to follow God, how to discern, how to understand and apply the laws that they had learned to all of these situations in life that they didn't know how to make sense of before. So they would follow a leader or a rabbi as a group, and they would ask questions, and they would learn more, and they would watch the rabbi or the leader, and then they would keep asking, well, why did you do that? And why did you decide to do that? And what if we did this? And so it was this relationship as an official kind of disciple. Jesus had disciples. We know he had 12 disciples that he spent a lot of time with. And then he had a group of 72 disciples that he sent out to do all kinds of different things. And it even alludes to a larger group of disciples in the New Testament that were following Jesus. And then there was another group of people that followed Jesus, and they were called the crowds. And the crowds did disciple-like things. You know, they followed Jesus, they listened to Jesus, they learned things from Jesus, sometimes they argued with Jesus. But were the crowds called disciples? No. There was a distinction between the crowd and the disciple. This was like an official thing that people became, and there was something that changed, that happened to make somebody go from one of the crowd to becoming a disciple. So what was it? What did it take to become a disciple? Somebody who's longing to follow, somebody who's trying to learn and discover, what does this life in a relationship with God look like? Well, if we split all four of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if we split them in half, there's something fascinating that we find. You do it. Read through, find the halfway point, and look to see what happens. In every Gospel, you see a first half, and you see a second half. And in the middle is some sort of a dramatic, marked shift. The Gospel of John is perhaps the most clear. The first half is about the 3 years of Jesus' life, and the second half is about the last week of Jesus' life. And you think, wow, and how's that last half of the book about just a week of his life? Well, that's because John needed to tell the story that way. Matthew and Mark are similar, but they have a different story that's right in the middle. And it's a fascinating story that changes everything. And guess what it's about? Being a disciple. So here's how the story goes. This is how Jesus and the disciples are interacting, and see if you can find the moment when the shift happens in the story. So it's in your bulletin or it's up here on the screen, and here's the event. Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" "Well," they replied, "some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you are one of the other prophets." Then he asked them, "But who do you say I am?" Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about it. Then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Seriously, can you imagine reprimanding Jesus? I mean, holy moment here. Anyway, Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples, then reprimanded Peter. "Get away from me, Satan," he said. "You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." Then, calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, "If any of you wants to be my disciple, you must give up your way, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it." Did you hear the shift? Did you sense when kind of in the story it happened? I mean, you feel this ramp up, this anticipation, and that's been happening for the first half of Mark's whole book. There's this anticipation about who is this guy? Is he really the one that God sent? Is he the real one? And if he is, we get to be with him? I mean, there's this anticipation of could it be? And then at the moment that they speak that it is, it's like all downhill. And everything just seems to turn. Because Peter is so elated and is excited, and he's like, "But Jesus, the stuff you're talking about doesn't match up with the Jesus that I think that you are, because how could the Son of God do these things?" And so he reprimands Jesus. And of course Jesus looks at him and says, No. You don't understand what it means to be the Son of God and the Savior of the world. This is what it means and looks like. And then in that moment, Jesus says, "Hey, if you want to follow me, here's what it takes." And he says these three things. He says, "Give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me." And I think we kind of know what it means to give up our own way. We don't like to do it, but we know what it means. You know, we have plans, we have ideas, we have ways that we think everything should go. We're determined, we want to achieve that. And sometimes we just have to give it up. You know, if you've ever had a dream of who you wanted to be when you grew up, and then you didn't get there? And sometimes it's really hard to give it up because we want to be that. And Jesus is saying, if you want to be my disciple, if you want to be my student, learn the way to be in a relationship with God, you've got to be willing to give up your way. I mean, that famous proverb that says, "We can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps." You know, isn't that the tension? We can make plans, but God's the one who guides us and leads us. And if God's going to lead us in a different direction than where we think we're going, we got to give up our plans. We got to give up our way. And Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, then give up your way. A disciple does not say, "my way or the highway." But Jesus does say, "my way or the highway." You know, if we're going to become a disciple that's committed to discovering from Jesus about a relationship with God, then our way is not going to work. Sometimes we might be going the right way, and we realize that it is what Jesus wants. But other times, we've got to constantly ask, is this the way that you want me to go? Is this the right way? I mean, what if we were to ask at every turn and at every decision, God, is this the way that you're leading? Is this the way that you're calling me to go? That's the way of being a disciple. Now, skip to the third. You know, give up our own way, and then skip to the third. Jesus says to follow me, to follow Jesus. We talk a lot about being followers of God. That's popular language today. People don't so much talk about being Christians, they talk about being Christ followers. And there's something to that. I mean, we're following after Jesus. We are following the one that we want to be a disciple of. And when Jesus is talking about follow me, he's not so much talking about be 3 steps behind, and I'm here, and you just follow along wherever I go. He's also talking about imitate me. Do what I do. Copy me. There's places where the Apostle Paul's writing letters and he's saying, live like me. I want you to live the life I live. I mean, it's very bold to say something like that. But that's what Jesus is saying. I want you to imitate my life. I want you to be such a close follower of me that you do what I do and you make decisions in the way that I make decisions. We copy Jesus. If we want to be disciples, we follow and we imitate and we copy Jesus. And isn't that sort of similar to give up our own way? If we give up our own way, then we're on Jesus' way. If we give up the plans that we have, then Jesus wants us to follow his plans. If we're giving up this path, we're going to follow Jesus' path, or at least that's what he wants. So the two are kind of similar. And then there's this one that's stuck in the middle that just doesn't seem to match. This one about giving up our cross. Or taking up our cross. That's often, I think, the most confusing one. And I think it was probably the most shocking one when people heard it, because everybody knew what it means to take up your cross. I mean, that's to carry that big beam on your shoulders and your back, and that's the beam that you would carry to the end of your life. I mean, that was the sentence, that was the punishment that people bore in the day, and you were given that punishment if you did something terribly wrong. And that was you carrying something to the end of your life. And so for Jesus to say, I want you to take up your cross and follow me, it sounds like he's saying you're just going to walk to the end of your life. And I think this is what leads to the understanding of when Jesus says, take up your cross, he's meaning, if you're going to follow me, life is going to be horrible. It's going to be miserable. And you are going to have the toughest life ever. I don't think that's exactly the rallying cry that Jesus was looking for. Come on everybody, let's go. And I think that's why, maybe that's not exactly what he always meant. Also, think about the fact of what the first and the third piece of this how to be a disciple are talking about. They're talking about give up your way, follow after my way, and take up your cross. And what if the take up your cross is saying the exact same thing as these other two? What if to take up our cross is to take up our life and the things that we have, the plans we have and the ways we have, and to carry them to their death? That they no longer matter. They're done. I'm going to carry them to the end. Because Jesus wants us to follow him. I mean, the way of the disciple is to get us all out of the way so that Jesus can be completely in the way of our lives. I mean, Jesus is black or white about this. He's all or nothing. He wants every part of us, and he wants the rest of us away. It's gone. I mean, he kind of wants all of our ways out of the way so his way can have priority. He wants all of us. That's a disciple. It's about giving up my way and adopting Jesus' way. And Jesus didn't just mean this for a one-time moment decision of, I'm now a disciple. This is a daily kind of decision for anybody who has become a disciple to stay being a disciple. This is every day us getting up and making decisions and asking, God, I want to be your disciple. Jesus, I want to follow. Is this the way you have for me? Lord, I want to follow. What do I need to take up? What cross do I need to take up? What do I need to carry to its end so that I can completely follow you? This is the kind of dedication. This is the kind of decision. This is the kind of disciple that Jesus wants. And when we're disciples, God equips us to be able to do the work that God calls us to do. What is it that disciples do at the end of Jesus' life with them? They carry on the work of Jesus. Jesus sends them out to be fishers of people. Jesus says, you are my disciples, now go. And you have work to do. So go out there and do that work. A disciple isn't just a learner and a student. A disciple is one who is sent to do the work that God has for us to do. And the way we do it is when we give up our way and we fill it with Jesus' way. Let's pray.